Hello, everybody. Lecture 3. So this is, we're halfway through the course, and hoping you all had a little time last week to reflect on what we've already learned, or what you're not too sure about, and also to get out and do some interviews. And that's really where I'd like to start. And I'm going to see as much as I can of the screen of all of you guys. So I'm going to ask my helpers from the team here to just take a quick count in case I can't see all the hands up. But so we were supposed to start with customer discovery interviews, and I know that's been challenging for a number of you. I got a little feedback in office hours this week on how it's going. And I'm sure the rest of you have questions as well. So maybe a good starting place would be just to take a little poll on how many of you were able to actually do any interviews. So let's start there. Okay, I see hands up. Hands up, please, for any interviews. And Ahmed, maybe since I can't see all the hands, thank you. Yeah, because some people aren't on. Can some of the helpers tell me how many hands are up? Ahmed? Ahmed?
4 right now. Hold on. 7, 4, about 9.
9. Okay. All right. Well, that's a start. How many of you did one interview? Hand up. One, not more than one. Okay. Russell, you did 1, right? No more? Okay. How many of you did 2? 3. And I can't see hands, so Ahmed, I'm counting on you to count. More than 3, 4 or 5. All right, Ahmed, please give me the rundown. How many do we have in the group?
It's about 3 in every single category.
3. Okay. All right. So good. That's a start. And I would, let's see, I don't know how, because I'm not looking at the front. So let me change my screen so I can see more of what. Okay, so there's a resource that I wanted to recommend to you in terms of how to do these interviews, because I think some of it's been challenging. And I don't know if you can all read this cartoon, but this is sort of a reinforcement of you have to talk to people who don't love you. I've been told I need to get candid, unbiased feedback on my startup idea. We love this idea and we're so proud of you, son. That's what we don't want, but of course that's what happens. And this resource at the bottom is something for those of you who are struggling a bit with this whole thing. This is a free book, and that's the link. It was actually sponsored by people at NYU Entrepreneurship Center, and wrote it along with the author. So it's a real tips on how to do customer discovery. And if you want to just talk about how to get started, take a look at page 44 onward. So that's there for you to resource. And then for those of you who have trouble starting on this, just a few tips. And first of all, where do you even start? And it's getting referrals from people you already know. So even if I told you, look, don't go interview somebody in the next office to you because they're your colleagues and they're going to reinforce, you can still go ask them, who do you know who's not in our group, who I could go talk to for some ideas about what I'm studying. So that's, and then once you get an interview, you ask everybody you've interviewed for more referrals. So at the end of the interview, you say, this was incredibly helpful. I really appreciate your time. I'd love to talk to more people who are as knowledgeable as you are. Always compliment them. And can you suggest some people? And then get their email addresses right away from that person. So that will expand your universe. with a direct referral. So it's really quite easy. And then you can go to the next person and say, yeah, Jean Jiang suggested that we chat. I'm talking about whatever. And then always, because you can say you're researchers or in an innovation program, you can, that's again, an easy way to talk to people, because you're not trying to sell them anything. You're not trying to push anything. You're just doing research. So that you can all do because you're in this program and many of you are researchers. And then ask for advice. People love to be asked for advice. It compliments them. Steve Blank, who's, as I think I've mentioned his name before, who is one of the best known people in this field, has a line where he says, I've been told that you are like one of the top people in your field, and I would really appreciate just a few minutes to get advice from you on this thing I'm working for. So he compliments them. And then another way to get to people, which you might not have thought about, is to call not the CEO of the organization you're trying to get into, but their admin. And it's a great trick. I've used this so many times myself. You get to the admin and you say, I wonder if you could help direct me. I'm kind of lost in your organization. I'm a researcher at wherever, UT, and working in this area. And I would really love to connect with the director of development in your organization. Can you suggest who that would be? And then when you get a name from that admin, you can say, the CEO's office suggested I give you a call, which of course is very powerful. So, they sort of don't have any choice but to take your call at that point, right? So just a few tips here. So I'd love to hear from those of you who did any interviews about what that experience was like, and what was hard, what was easy, what you got out of it. And so I'll look for volunteers, and yeah, I'll start with volunteers, but you know what happens if I don't get any. Okay, who raised their hand? I thought, oh, good, Russell, go for it.
Directing was difficult. And I got so much information. I mean, recording it and trying to get it off the recording and what was important about writing a book was probably the most challenging part of it. I just kept asking, I'm looking at my question in front of me, and I just kept asking questions, and I was given a whole bunch of information. So really the post analysis was probably a little difficult for me. It's very time consuming.
The post analysis, okay. Do you think it would have been, I'm surprised and pleased you were able to record it. That sometimes it puts people off. So, but you were able to, and then did you have somebody there with you that you could bounce ideas with? Like, what did you hear? What did I hear? What was important? Or were you on your own?
I was on my own.
Okay, all right. And so the part of going back through it and picking up on what was key was the hard part.
Yeah, I think I missed your point there. It's like what I hear. I think I kept rolling. And I was kind of really, honestly, at the end, I did my cell, so I couldn't resist it. But the information came out. It's just a lot of it. So I had to go back and listen to it again and pull what was the important parts. And,
Okay, well, at least you captured it, so that's good.
Yeah, and I found some things I didn't know, that's for sure. So.
Oh, good. Well, can you give us some examples of what you learned that you hadn't known before?
I think just the, this was with oncologists, I think just the prescribing of particular drugs was not as simple and cut and dried as I thought it was going to be. That was the one thing I got out of it. I thought, okay, there's this new thing coming out. What do you think of this? It's like, well, I don't know. And you have to have a look at this and have to be recommended for this. And, it was not as easy as I thought to get a new drug in front of somebody.
Okay, good. That's good learning. Yeah. So continue to probe on that as you do more interviews. That's, now pick up on that direction and make sure you ask. Yeah, great. Okay, who else would like to volunteer?
Okay,
Yeah.
please, I don't want to step on you. Please, continue.
No, okay, yeah, that will be quick. So we started, if you remember, we are using a microbubble platform, so using ultrasound. The application would be breast cancer, but we started interviews by 2 clinicians who use microbubbles in the clinic, and the next interview will be on the oncologist for the application itself. And I guess what surprised me is that I had many questions ready, but for each question, sometimes it was hard to try to stop somebody. I didn't want to interrupt, but they were going on and on and on about, they were very excited to speak about what they were doing, but at some point it was kind of going away from what I was looking for. So it was difficult to stop the person kind of recenter to what I wanted to learn. But I learned a lot, so that was great. I kept it to 15 minutes. That was difficult. Sina was with me taking notes and asking questions too. And I guess what surprised me is the way they do in the clinic looks like not only in what we're working, there is a lot of stuff that can be improved, but also on other aspects that I was not interested in, that we might have discovered new interest now, things we could explore in the lab, thanks to this interview. So overall, it was a great experience.
Great. So a couple of ideas. First of all, you don't have to keep it to 15 minutes. That's what you tell them. But in point of fact, let it go. If they want to keep talking, let it go for an hour or whatever, 40. So if you tell people I need an hour of your time, they're going to say I'm too busy. But if you tell them 15 minutes and then they're interested, as it sounds like they were, don't feel like you need to cut it off. All right, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because other people may not have understood that either. The other thing is keeping control of the interview. That's something that you always have to do, because people do go off on tangents and on what interests them. And, maybe it's useful and maybe it's not, and that's your decision. But if you feel like it's going in a direction that's not useful, you just have to stop them nicely and draw them back to where you are. So maybe, a way to do it is sort of just jump in and say, well, that's a really interesting perspective. But I'd really appreciate knowing more about, and go back to where you want to be. So it's a bit, it's a bit of a challenge to control it, but you want to make sure you get what you need out of it, right? It sounds like you learned something anyway.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
So that's good. Yeah, Chun.
Thank you. So I cheated a little bit. The people I interviewed, basically people I know. I guess that will get a start from easy. But 3 of the people I interviewed are actually having experiences bringing product. They are working device industry. They have the experiences of bringing product to the clinic and even to the marketplace. So my question is really centered around, if I have this product, what should I do? I got a bunch of advice. I think it's very valuable. Get a lot of sense to-do list, at least in my agenda. I think their advices are very, very helpful. I would like to turn my question actually to Jax and Russell. I wonder what kind of questions you ask when you do your interview. How do you formulate your question?
So the way I started the interview for the 2 I interviewed were to describe how was their clinical day routine, and then from there asking more questions about part of the routine that interested me, which was then asking what types of patients, like Stephanie did last time, who was referring those patients to them and why, and then kind of moving them towards patients who require the use of contrast agents versus non-contrast, and then seeing what is difficult or what are the challenges with those cases or use of contrast and how it could be improved, what they would like to see as improvement, and what are the current challenges technical. And also it looks like a lot of them are training engineering challenges that are somewhat independent of what we're working on, but could be to keep in mind for platforms to develop, because you want to make everything simple to use. So that's really how I kind of went from very broad, big picture of their day in the clinic, and then kind of focusing more and more on the type of case, and then specific cases, and then issues in those cases, and how they overcome those, and what could be a good solution.
That's excellent, Jacques. That's exactly what you should have done. So it's a great
Thank you.
model for people. Start broad, understand the landscape, get closer and closer to what you really want to know. Yeah, really, really well done. So congratulations on that. Chun, did that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Very helpful.
good. Yeah,
Thank you.
good. A good model to follow. George.
So thank you. So I have done an interview with the people from research and development and GlaxoSmithKline from both UK, Boston, and California. So there were 5 people.
Wow.
So I realized that I can contact a person who is the chief of staff at GSK. So exactly working on human resources. And I think I have done a little trick. I say, look, we can discuss for 1 hour or how long you want. And I want to learn from you some stuff. And if you want to learn from me in the balance, other stuff we can discuss without any problem. So I had the research and development head from Boston, the chief of bioinformatics from the London offices, and other 3 people that, believe me, I wrote only the first name because I was not able to keep it on the stuff. So, and we discussed for over 1 hour. I think it went quite 1 hour and 10 minutes when we have to stop. And we start with large stuff. So what are the challenges of RNA therapeutics? So I asked them if because they are very interested in GlaxoSmithKline in RNA therapeutics. So I didn't pick them because they look great and they have a big name. It's exactly because they have a very big interest in RNA therapeutics of any type, not only what I'm doing. So I was speaking with people who are already knowledgeable in the field. So what are the challenges of RNA therapeutics was the first stuff that we discussed. And as I told you, they come with their own opinion. And of course, in the balance, they ask also about my opinion. Then I was asking if this RNA therapeutics, they see it as innovative, and if there are innovative approaches to the new agents to be evaluated in the clinic, because what I'm doing with the company, I'm doing an innovative approach, small molecules targeting RNA, something that not quite nobody is doing. Then we were speaking exactly here without knowing, they touch exactly what Sarah and Enrique were building. What are the mechanisms? So we discussed.
George, let me stop you for a minute because we don't have time to run through the entire interview. First of all, amazing that you got to such senior people. How did you do that?
I told you, through the chief of staff at GSK.
How did you? That's someone you knew already?
Yeah, I realized we discuss before in advance and not now, years in advance. And I say, look, let's why not to find out? Why not to find out?
Okay, excellent. So it's a contact you had.
But again, being at this high level, of course, they told me, okay, we discuss with you, but we want to know also your opinion. Sure. Then, of course, it come a little strange situations. They say, but what do you think about the non-disclosure agreement? I say, okay, look, I still have to discuss about these things. I cannot say, and we come to a consensus.
Okay. And did you learn anything you hadn't known?
Yeah, I learned, of course. I learned, first of all, that they are very interested in what we are doing. And I learned if we will develop really a startup, I would say they are very good people to contact to move forward on developing the things. Because
all right.
It was really very interesting. And thank you very much. If you would not come with this idea, believe me, I would not stress myself through my 20,000 emails to find this lady from GSK to think that she's the chief of staff and all the things. Thank you. It was really very helpful. It was really
good. Okay. All right. Great. Okay. Any last comment before we move on? I mean, this is very useful to see where people have gotten with all of this. And I think maybe Hans, did you have something you'd like to chat about?
Yeah, I had 4 interviews, and one of them, I sometimes get called by pharma industry, etc. Typically, this was a fairly low-level person, and I think he was surprised that I tried to interview him as a as an exchange for me talking to him first. So that was a little bit surprised, but it actually worked out. He actually got me in contact with 3 people at that company that I can talk to. So that was quite helpful. I think he felt a bit intimidated, quite frankly, but I tried to make him as comfortable as I could. And I tried to be charming, as you suggested. And then, the other 3, one was a junior colleague here, but in a completely different disease that I have no idea about. And that was quite helpful because I actually learned something. And in fact, there's a competitor who uses much smaller sliver of something to deliver something very similar to what we are doing, but we think we are better and we have a much broader application. So I think it's very interesting because actually competition that we can use as a proof of principle for some industries clearly now going after essentially the same principle that we are trying to master. So I think it's great. So very helpful. And then the other 2, one is a more like a private practice oncologist. So that was very helpful. He works with intratumoral injections at some of the competition or previous paths that we had in comparison to our prodrugs, and some of the complications from that was very helpful, get his perspective. And another one was actually a real leader in his field, a colleague of mine, we know each other, but he's at a completely different institution, he's at Harvard. And so we talked actually for quite some time, and he, I just asked for 15 minutes. I got 45 minutes out of it, and it was actually really good. He also, gave me some new ideas where to look and what to ask. So I think it was great.
Great, thank you. Well, for those of you who've been able to do this, you can see the value of it, and I'm glad. Thank you all for sharing. Some of you did what I told you not to, which is go test your idea. But it's at least through doing any interviews, you got a sense of what you can learn. And so I'm glad you did that. The best practice of this is what I heard Jacques talk about, which is just understand the landscape. Don't yet present your idea. Listen. Hear the problem they have. You'll get a chance to present your idea later on. But if the only way you can manage to do this is to tell people, save it till the end of the interview, use the interview, use 95% of the interview to learn from them, just the problem they have and how they're dealing with it. And then in the last 5% say, well, suppose you had this thing, how would that solve your problem? So, very valuable experience in the group and getting to senior people, which George did very, very well. I'm saying it with a French accent. I don't mean to, George. And, so the idea is do more of these. So over the next week, actually the bogey I set up was 10 interviews for the class. Should be easier now that you've gotten started. Hopefully you got referrals from people, or maybe some ideas here on this slide and from this new book that I've just suggested. It's a really quick read. It's, it's a book, but it's a quick read. So keep going on this. I'm available in office hours next week and by email if you have anything you want to discuss or questions to ask. But this is a very valuable thing that you're going to learn from. So, so great. So any last comments, questions before we move on to today's topic? All right, someone will let me know if there's something in the chat or with a hand raised or whatever. But I am going to keep going. Great, so now we're going to talk about business models. And let's start with, well, why bother? So a business model is the managerial equivalent of the scientific method. You start with a hypothesis, then you test it and you revise it when necessary. And the reason you do this is it's a planning tool. It focuses attention on how all elements of the company fit together into a whole. It will help you build a competitive company. And it's part of your value proposition. We talked about value proposition a week ago, 2 weeks ago, but the value that you provide to the marketplace. And of course, because we're into starting a for-profit business, a business model is going to direct you toward profitability. And you always have to think about that as a business, and if you have investors. So there's a very simple definition of what a business model is. It's how you're going to make money. Now, we can blow this out into a much bigger definition, which I'll do in a second. But if you can't figure out how to make money, you don't have a business. It's very fundamental. So you've got to figure this out, first and foremost. The more complete definition is all the elements of the business that can become revenue. And we'll talk a little bit more when we get to the business model canvas, which you've heard me mention when we talked about customer discovery. But all these different elements are the way that you can become profitable and create revenue and become profitable. So hold on to that thought and we'll come back to it. So a little history, and I've been in biotech since the early days. And in the early days, everybody was talking about a FIPCO, which is probably something you've never even heard of at this point. But it was a fully integrated pharma company. So we little tiny biotechs who were, a few scientists and some IP said, we're going to become the next GSK. And we're going to do everything ourselves. We're going to create the molecules. We're going to develop it. We're going to do clinical trials and manufacturing. And then we're going to go out and sell it. And that, of course, was pretty ridiculous because how were we going to do that? We didn't know anything about all this stuff. What we were good at was the science and bringing it along to the point where we had validated the science and figured out what market it was going to go to and then hand it over. So then everything became a VIPCO, or virtually integrated pharmaceutical company. And that was, we outsourced all kinds of things. So R&D was our thing. We were the scientists, we were biotech, and that's what we did well. And then we had to do preclinical studies, and typically we would then go outside with people who really knew how to do that to commercial standard, because it's pretty amazing that if you hand over your preclinical research to pharma, they are going to redo the whole thing because they don't really trust the way we do it in academia. Clinical development went to CROs, manufacturing went to a contract manufacturing organization, a CMO, and sales and distribution to a contract sales organization. So this all makes a lot more sense given our capabilities. And then, of course, it was the growth of the CRO market, contract research organizations, which I assume everyone knows what this is. They're organizations that actually take over and do clinical trials for you and will do preclinical research as well. They know what they're doing. They've grown up over the last 20 years to be pretty amazing, like this huge market. And even the pharmas who have all this capability in-house use CROs. So outsourcing is now mainstream. So this is the direction people go in. So let's move on to some different models. So given that there are CROs who can do this stuff, what about a virtual pharma company? And that's one model that people have followed. In this model, the company itself is just a small management core that holds intellectual property rights and coordinates external service providers to develop a drug. These companies keep fixed costs to an absolute minimum. They're very agile and responsive to fast-moving science, and they're typically funded by venture capital. and exit is through acquisition by a pharma. So these are not companies that have big headquarters. They have maybe a small office with a few employees. Everything's outsourced, but they are the glue that holds it all together. They're the ones who figure out what should we own, and then how are we going to get it developed, and who are we going to sell it to? And that's the business model. And it's been a very profitable one for lots of people. Wei, Chet, you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm more familiar with IC semiconductor industry, and what you show here sounds like a design house. Like basically they design circuits and then push all the development and prototyping and manufacturing to foundries. So my question is, does that kind of business model exist in the biotech?
It does, yeah. It absolutely does. And it became possible when there were all these outsourced possibilities. So, they might, this kind of a company might not keep the development for very long. They might do enough to get to a proof of concept, and so that they can sell it to pharma and let pharma take it over. But you absolutely can do it. And it's a very clever way to capitalize on knowledge of what's going on in the industry, what's hot, acquiring ownership in the right IP, and then making it all happen. Russell?
But these pharma still own they manufacture and own everything, right? Because this is still a little bit different from the semiconductor foundry, because these foundries, they don't own any brand. Basically, Intel asks them to make chips. Anyone can make chips that way. Yeah.
So the CROs don't own anything. They're contract research. So let's say you're the new co. You've put this whole thing together. You own it all. You contract things out, but you still have the ownership. And then when you sell the asset, you then figure out there's some sort of a deal with the pharma, but they're actually buying the asset. So you get some returns depending on how the deal is structured. Is that
okay? Great, thanks.
Yeah, sure. Russell.
Yeah, I was just going to add, Wei, that's how we're structured. This is our model. And we've been working this model for 1.5 years. It's really valid. So if you ever want to talk about it, I'm happy to kind of get on a phone call and tell you how it all works from our perspective anyway.
Yeah, why don't you say a few more words about it, Russell? How is it working for you?
Well, essentially, we're in North Texas, so a lot of, we don't have a lot of talent available to us, and we obviously are a startup, so we don't have a lot of cash either. So we're in preclinical now, and we've been able to outsource all of our everything, absolutely everything. Certainly our accounting, our tax accounting, our audit, it's all outsourced. We have an outsourced, we call it head of operations, if you like. It's running all our preclinical regulatory. We outsource our toxicology. My gosh.
How many people do you have in the company?
Me.
Employees, full-time?
We have one.
That's you?
That's me, yeah. Yeah, the great thing about it, though, is we've been able to access some really, really great people. So we have consultants. We have about 5 main consultants now from all different parts of the world, and all pretty much leaders in their field, and have been really, Zoom makes these meetings so much easier these days, but the amount of information and talent that's available to us and the guidance we're getting from them has been extraordinary. So when we have, for example, we're in formulation now. So our formulation and our CMC people sit in those meetings with us as we go through with our CRO that's doing our formulation, and help us direct what they're doing and ensure we're not making mistakes. And the amount of information they have in their experience is extraordinary, and we just couldn't buy that. So I think, for what we're doing, it's very valid, very inexpensive. These the consultants range from $185 an hour to $300, so they're not even expensive, but highly, highly valuable to us.
All right. Is your exit sale to pharma?
Yes, absolutely. We expect the exit after phase 1. That's our goal.
Thank you for volunteering that. Really interesting. So here you have somebody right in this cohort who's doing this business model, probably a model most of you haven't thought about, because you're all picturing, well, I'm going to build this big company or whatever, but this can be very profitable. So that's great, Russell. And I'd love to learn more too. Yeah, another time we'll chat about it.
Quick questions. How
Yeah.
did you get the funding to do all that in the first place? Russell.
Okay, so combination. So some of it came from SBIR grant that covers a lot of our studies and some salaries. The rest is just raising capital, you know, $50,000 at a time. I think we've raised now, I think $1.8 million now. And that essentially is paying for all of that. It's just beating the road down.
So does the NIH or CPRIT accept a proposal that's based on CRO type of research? Or
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly how our grants were set up. Yep. So remember, CPRIT generally wants matching funds. So.
SPR only requires the registration of the space.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Ratna. Say it again.
It requires you need to have an office space, but you can do virtually all the jobs.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've all learned that during COVID too.
Hey,
Winbo.
Ratna, we have an office space now.
Oh, wonderful.
Hey,
Winbo.
thank you. Some of the questions actually was asked by Robert already. Does CPRIT or NIH support CRO use? But thank you for the answers. Relate to that is also about CRO. I guess a naive question is that do you choose CRO? How do you choose CRO, and how often do you have to? How often do you trust or may reconsider different CROs in producing different results possibly? I don't know enough how the CRO's quality.
That's a question for Russell, I take it.
Yeah, okay, yeah, Russell. You probably
I missed that all. Sorry, I kind of lost you halfway through. Can you just put one sentence?
Sure. I just, if there are multiple CROs, how would you choose them? And how would you trust the results from different CROs?
The consultants, you mean?
CRO.
CROs?
CRO.
Well, you got to interview them. I mean, we probably, for a formulation, we interviewed maybe 5 different companies from all different countries of the world. And in the end, it came down to two major pieces. One, cost, but that wasn't the driving force in the end. It was certainly, what it was the intelligence, the overall view of how we're going to proceed with formulation and what our potential outcomes were going to be. The group we chose, which were in Melbourne, Australia, had a completely different take to everybody else and seemed far more experienced with our type of molecule than anybody else was. And that for us was a big sell. We thought, okay, they know what they're doing. The guy that they put on our project stays on our project, and he's a very, very intelligent guy and very experienced in formulation. It didn't hurt that they were half the price of everybody else in the end with the exchange rates and Australian government rebates for R&D, but essentially it's choosing the best person to do the job and then evaluating cost against that.
Thank you.
They'll all talk to you. You got to brief them all. They'll all give you estimates for sure. No problem.
Yeah, Australia has a good reputation for exactly that: high quality and low prices. And like anything else, referrals. Always talk to people who've used a particular CRO and find out how they did for them as well.
One other piece too, our consultants were able to help guide us to some of these people as well, with a lot of experience. And so their stamp of approval also helped us know we're making the right decision.
Yeah, great.
Russell, can I ask you a question? I mean, you've got a lot of people involved in Australia and consultants. How much of the company do you retain? Because you've borrowed a lot of money already.
Oh, well, a huge amount. I mean, these are all just paid people. I mean,
yeah, but you had to raise money to pay them. So the people that are putting capital into your company obviously want to share.
Absolutely. That's another session coming up, I think.
Okay.
But essentially, we raised all our capital through, well, half of it came through grants, so that's non-dilutional. Okay. And the other half has come through an instrument called SAFE Instrument, which is a simple agreement for future equity. And that is all, that's not giving shares up at this point. It's not until we go to Series A do we actually to distribute the actual stock. So it's our job as a company then to try and create as much value as we can before we get to Series A to protect both the founders and also to protect this early investors. So
Hey,
essentially,
let's stop there before
that's
I get
another thing.
Well, I just
Yeah.
wanted to say, just to give Russell a break here, guys, don't forget this is a recorded line. There might be opportunities to have additional conversations in person. But let's give Russell a break here on grilling him for all the details.
Yeah, exactly. And we will talk about investment next week. So anyway, let's keep going. And I think there was a lot of learning. Thank you, Russell, for sharing what you're doing. For those of you who don't want to follow this business model, which is quite, not sort of the norm these days, you can still outsource development. And that's what people are doing these, you're not building your own development in a company where you're retaining all the ownership. So, okay, onward, and why can I not forward these? Okay, great. Okay, so platform business model. Now, we've talked a bit about platforms as enabling technology. It's protected by IP, and it comprises the tools that can enhance a wide range of R&D projects. So many of you are working on platform technologies as well as individual programs. And in this platform business model, the partner is paying licensing fees, fee for service, and milestones. So let's say all you're doing is a platform. You are then licensing that platform to other companies who'd like to use it for discovering their own drugs. And for that, they license it, they are paying you fee for service, and then you get milestones as they continue in the development of that drug. You also can negotiate getting royalties on sales. So this is a pretty good structure for you to get some financial return fairly soon. And it also is very validating, because if you can say, we've licensed our platform to BMS and GSK, all of a sudden it looks like you've really got something important, and investors and other farmers will appreciate that you've got some real technology here that's useful. So the pharma is absorbing the financial risk. They're paying you upfront and all these near-term preclinical milestones, and they're paid regardless of how successful the product they're using the platform for is successful. But they own any of the assets that they are using this platform for, and they're paying you a single-digit royalty in the future. So a very interesting business model for those of you working on new technologies. There are a number of successful raises that have come from platform-based companies. Mammoth Bio is a CRISPR-based detection platform for molecular diagnostics. ICON has a proprietary platform to discover Cas proteins, and Atalanta is pioneering new treatment options for neurodegenerative diseases with a proprietary RNA interference platform. And then, of course, there's Moderna. We all know about Moderna and how it started as a platform for RNA treatments. And of course, they've got an amazing valuation. So we all know that Moderna stories. So an interesting business model to pursue. Taking it a bit further, you might want to consider a platform plus programs. So many companies might start with the platform and then evolve into this hybrid business model, combining the platform with discovery of its own products. So the strategy is to create revenues from licensing or selling the platform for a specific use, and then using that income stream to fund your own development. So the way you do that is you can exclude certain indications. So you might say, okay, I'm willing to license this platform for everything but in your case, oncology. Someone else might say cardiovascular, whatever it is they feel is the area they would like to create their own IP from. And then you can license the platform for everything else. So investors like this because there's near-term revenue generation from platform sales, and that's combined with asset creation. And I have to say that today, this is the most adopted business model in therapeutics. So the asset creation and out-licensing is a way to take this hybrid model and take it further along to product. So the company is developing the asset, perhaps through a lead molecule or a drug that's completed preclinical testing and then out-licensing it to pharma. And then pharma likes this because this is a source of de-risked compounds and the startup gets a revenue stream. So that's good for the investors. So any questions about this so far? Can't see. I think there are things in the chat. Can somebody check the chat for me? Oh, I can read it now. Okay, no questions. Great. All this stuff for Russell. All right, any questions on these models? Because these are highly applicable to what most of you are working on. All right, we're gonna, oh, great. Okay, Jean.
I have a question regarding the license at which stage, because I heard like at the early stage, and then especially for those big reasonable size farmers, they license, make the license, and sometimes they just table it. And then, so I just wondering at which stage and what kind of the collaboration, the partnership will fit for because we do need the money to develop, to get in further development. If we finish all the preclinical stage, maybe it's easier, but at early stage, if some company interested in license technology, what kind of risk?
Well, we're going to actually talk about partnering in the next slide if I could manage to forward it, but it's a good question. So I'll go back here. So, you know, pharma will say we want very early assets, but when you probe them, they don't really mean that. They really, what they really mean is proof of concept has been shown. And again, what they really mean is they'd like it in man. So you have to take what they say publicly with a grain of salt. This is sort of the place that I've played in a lot. And every time we send out an entrepreneur to talk to pharma, what they hear is come back after you've done this experiment or that experiment or whatever. So, so while in theory, they might say they want to license something very early, that is not the reality. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, like in anything, the more you can do, the more you're gonna have to sell. And sometimes, actually, I think it's this next example that might be illustrative. This is Bolt Therapeutics, and they have proof of concept. So first of all, they've got a platform. And they talk about their immune stimulating antibody conjugate approach, new category of immunotherapies, and so on. Okay, so they've got a platform technology. In addition to the platform, they have their own programs, and this shows their pipeline. And they, you know, have a program in phase 1. They, you know, so proof of concept varies, is what we just said. It could be the completion of IND enabling studies. It could be a phase 1 safety trial. It could be phase 2A data where you've got some efficacy read. And back when I did business development for biotech, that everyone really wanted 2A. I think there are people willing to play earlier now, but it's really hard to get people to play at the preclinical stage. although, you know, it's not impossible. So just to set your expectations, this is an example of platform plus pipeline, still what we would consider early stage, but something that is attractive. So in this pharma partnering model, you would, there are different ways to do it, but let's just say you develop your first product through proof of concept. This is because you need something to sell. And you then partner with the pharma on programs. It could be that one program, it could be on multiple programs if you have that, but you want to keep a program or more for your own internal development and fund it through that partnership. So let's say you've got a platform technology and you've identified what your first goal is going to be is one indication where you're going to create a product. You want to take it through some sort of proof of concept, and then so now you've said, hey, we've got a platform, guess what, it works. We've done one already. We have other programs coming through, and you might decide you want to partner that first proof of concept product and to bring in some revenue, and then identify other programs to work on, keep them for internal development. You've now got revenue coming in through your partnership, and then you have more options, and you can develop that internal pipeline longer before you partner it. So whereas the first one, maybe you partnered like right after you got through preclinical proof of concept, if you're lucky. The second one, maybe you keep through phase 2A to show some efficacy, and then you're able to get more economics from partnering it. Does that make sense for people? Yeah, good. I see Jean nodding. Anyone else nodding? Okay. Okay, here's an example of a company. It's an advanced company. They're actually public. They're a Bay Area company. I know the CEO. He's been CEO for like a decade now. He shakes his head when I say, oh my God, you've done so well. And he said, oh, all those years, it was just, you know, touch and go, but now he has. And so Sutro Biopharma is an oncology company, and they have all these different things that they can sell. They've got a platform, they have products, they have a pipeline, and they have collaborations with lots of pharmas. And this is a great goal to get to. This is what a successful biotech company looks like, or biopharma company looks like. Different ways to proceed with a pipeline. So you can look them up, Sutro Biopharma, and see what they've done. You'll see their leadership team is now, of course, is quite advanced. This is not what you're going to be right out of the gate, but it's something to keep your eye on as you think about where you want to take this. Here they are. So this is one of their collaborations, just one. So at this point, they're able to set up, you know, prestigious collaborations, or I should say collaborations with, you know, top pharmas for different indications, and they have a number of them. Okay, repurposing. This is something that I'm guessing nobody is doing, but I just want you to know about it as an option, as you, you know, if what you're working on turns out not to be what you want to take forward, this is another way to play in this field. Repurposing or repositioning is the process of identifying a new therapeutic use for an old drug, an existing drug, and whatever, an available drug available because it's not cut off by IP. And so pharma has many drugs, as an example, that it puts on the shelf because either it didn't fit where they were going in their business, or they didn't think the mechanism was promising for the indication they had in mind. So it's available. And the advantage is phase 1 safety may be established already. They just have chosen not to continue it. There may even have been an efficacy trial. So there are a lot of advantages to starting here. The drug could be approved for other uses, so therefore it's been tested in humans, and there's detailed information available on pharmacology, formulation, potential toxicity, and repurposing builds on previous R&D, so new candidate therapies can be ready for clinical trials very quickly. As an example, Evista was repurposed for osteoporosis, and it's now being tested as an antiviral. So this is a really great strategy. It shortcuts a lot of what you would have to do in a completely new agent because you've already got some evidence that it's working and at least it's safe. I was curious to see how many oncology drugs had been repurposed, and it turns out there are quite a few. This is just part of a list that shows that for the drugs, the number of drugs that have been repurposed for different types of cancers. And this is drugs by, repurposed drugs by trials. And again, a great number of trials that have been done for these repurposed drugs. So a different strategy, a different business model. Any questions on all of that before I move on? All right.
Stephanie, real quick, how many of those do you have a sense from that paper, how many of those are repurposed by drug companies repurposing their own products versus external products?
Great question, and no, I didn't read the original paper. I read the research, the accumulation of the trials, but no. I mean, certainly a drug company might repurpose as well. And so they just have to look at what's on their shelf and what they've got in the active pipeline and decide whether it makes sense to strategically to go and repurpose something. So yeah, don't have the data, but good question. Okay, outcomes-based models. So we've seen many more of these models since drugs got so expensive. And now you can see that, I guess they call it the Netflix model is one way to look at it. And then the 1-year milestone-based contract is just another example of how this works. So I'm going to move forward and come back to this. Spark Therapeutics, gene therapy company based in Philadelphia. The cost of their therapy when it came out was $1 million. And it caused tremendous controversy. It's like, why should anyone charge $1 million for therapy? The argument was it's curative. This is not a chronic therapy. This is a one-time and you're out. You've cured the condition. So if you do the math on it, what it costs to treat somebody over many years versus doing it once and solving the problem, Spark would argue that there was a payback for this. But the insurers are having trouble absorbing this argument. So they implemented a risk-sharing model for Luxturna, which is the name of their therapy for retinal dystrophy. They get paid only if the cure is successful and it endures long-term. So payment for treatments are made in installments, and then Spark will issue rebates if the measured outcome is not reached over time. So this eliminates the risk of paying for failed treatment and an increased insurer's willingness to pay. And in fact, their first year sales hit $27 million, showing that this has been an effective strategy. Okay. There's also an example here in a number of different drugs. Kymriah, I don't know if I said that right. Kymriah, whatever. Cell therapy, oncology, $475,000 for treatment. All these very expensive drugs have found that they need to go to this risk-based model. Look at the bottom, $2.1 million. This is just really too much for an insurer to absorb. Novartis began CAR T payment experiments with a CMS-based, outcomes-based contract. So again, they've seen that this is a way that they can proceed with their expensive pricing. I'll go back to this in a second. So just back here, what's working, these contracts all have different formats. This might be an example on the left of a 1-year milestone-based contract where there's some initial upfront payment, the treatment begins, then they assess at a year whether the outcome metric that was pre-established was reached. And then if it's reached, the company gets paid. And if it's underperformed, it has to rebate. So complicated financial models, but it can be done. And there are examples of companies that have done that. So I don't think any of you are really working in this very expensive drug realm, but just something to be aware of. Okay, questions on that before we move forward?
What is CMS, Stephanie?
Oh.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's Medicare. Thanks for asking that. I always forget about this jargon. Yeah, that's Medicare. Don't at the moment, I can't remember what it all stands for, but yeah. So that's where 2/3 of the spending goes. Very important. Other questions?
I'm just curious, is is this type of payment after seeing the outcome kind of model, is there any long-term outcome? Is it profitable, or how good is the business?
I think it's too early for long-term because this only just started. I presume that the companies have modeled this out, but yeah, we don't know. Just hold on for a few years. Good question though.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Okay, let's go onward. So here's another model. This is actually a venture capital business model, but I'll show you how your startups can tie into that. So this has become very popular in I'd say the last couple of years, company creation. It's been around for longer than that, but now it seems like a whole bunch of the major VCs are doing it. This is Arch Ventures. I don't know if you all have heard of them. They are highly visible to us. They have come into UCSF and found faculty members and done deals with them sort of without tech transfer being terribly involved. So we may not even really know much about it until it happens. Sometimes they just take the faculty member and have them come work on other things and create a company around that. So it's been looks like it's been very successful for the VCs. Again, it's a bit early, but Arch Ventures just announced a new almost $2 billion fund to create these early stage companies. This is the most recent startup out of UCSF, and this is one of the ones where we knew it was happening but weren't really involved. But they've just created with $3 billion an amazing team of people who are going to create a company for them. So the CEO is a man named Hal Barron. He's the head of R&D at GlaxoSmithKline. He's leaving shortly. And there's a huge C-suite, which is people with C-level titles like COO, Chief Operating Officer, Chief Business Officer, and so on. They've got it staffed with some of the biggest names in life science. The former Genentech executive, who's Hal Barron, is joining, again, very well-known people at the top. The founders of Juno Therapeutics, of Grail, and many other companies, formerly Genentech people. They're going to use this $3 billion in capital that's committed by investors to try to turn breakthroughs into understanding cellular rejuvenation into medicine. So this is an aging startup. and I'm going to work with all these amazing scientists. So, here's another one called Veer. Veer has hit the press recently because they have at the moment the only effective therapy against Omicron. It's called, I can't ever remember the name, sotinimab, something like that. It's a GSK/Vir therapeutic. And Vir was a startup in 2017. I know the CEO of Vir reasonably well. I've known him for 25 years. He put the company together from scratch. And I remember walking into his office. He had just taken a huge amount of space across from UCSF. And there were 7 people in the company. His initial funding was $250 million. And the concept, again, this is an arch deal. The concept was build an infectious disease company. This is an underfed area of disease. And this is the time to aggregate assets, build assets, and make a big play in it. And they were going to get funding up to $750 million, $750 million to build from scratch this company. And guess what? COVID happened 3 years later. And I was in the CEO's office when in February 2020, and he said, Arch is really excited about this COVID thing. And, we're going to pivot from I forget what their initial program was, but whatever they were working on, and going to start working on COVID. And then, fast forward, and here we are. So this is what company creation is all about. And I think this is where I don't have what I was looking for. But the idea is the venture capitalist brings together the resources to start the company. And they feel like they can do better than many startups can do. So they have now developed internal teams that work with founders who are often faculty members. And then they have a number of advisors to develop the strategy. So the internal team does the launch. They serve as an interim management, then they recruit an outside management team, and they're off to the races. So there's a company called Third Rock, which is also very well known for doing these. They raised a very large fund in 2019, and they were going to seed 10 to 12 life science companies. It's been very successful for them. So they will also bring in EIRs, venture partners. They have internal recruiters with strong biotech networks to speed up hiring. They bring processes in-house, like they'll have their own HR people, their own legal and accounting. Some of them have chief financial officers with financing experience to help drive fundraising. So this model has resulted in better companies tackling harder problems and moving faster than they thought was possible. So where does that leave all of you? Well, if you're the inventors, you can license your technology to one of these company creation startups, and that's what the VCs are looking for. They actually roam the halls of places like UCSF and probably UT, looking for what the next big play is going to be. And then when they find it, they license the technology. And then you, as the scientific founder, you can become a consultant to them. Maybe you can join the company as an advisor or have some role in it, because having someone who knows the technology is very important. But you're not going to be building a company. This is a completely different model. So it's not really a business model. It's more like an individual model. And this may suit some of you. I know a number of you here who don't really want to build a company. You're like trying to learn. Maybe you started out not really wanting to build one. Maybe as you learn more, you're saying this is really not the thing for me. But here's something else. Now the thing is, this is one where you have to be found. they have to want you. This is not going out and selling a bunch of VCs. This is, you're working on something so hot. This fits some VCs investment thesis, like this is an area we need to do something in. We can aggregate the resources, and if you've got the right technology, they're going to come for you. So any questions about company creation? All right, moving on. This is probably targeted to one group here, the molecular diagnostics crowd, small crowd. So what do you do for a molecular diagnostics business model? You have options. You can license your technology, that's always an option, and pharma may want it, diagnostics manufacturers may want it. You can build a CLIA lab. We've talked about that a little bit in the past in office hours, I know, in which case you create a lab that runs your diagnostic, and people, companies ship you samples, you run it through your diagnostic, you charge them a fee for doing this, or you can sell it directly to the companies. And the CLIA lab model is one that seems to work pretty well for individuals who want to build something they own and control, but don't want to sell directly into pharma. And it works for this company called S-Engine, which has a high throughput technology that simultaneously tests more than 200 cancer drugs against a patient's unique tumor organoid outside the body. They can decode the most effective and least toxic treatments for cancer therapy that DNA sequencing alone can't reveal. They start with a live tissue sample from the patient's tumor, and then the scientists get the sample, they run it through their CLIA certified lab in Seattle, and the test uses hundreds of 3D organoids grown, I think this is totally fascinating, which is why I'm describing it, grown from the patient's cancer. They're tested up to 150 cancer drugs and drug combinations. And then the output is understanding how an individual's cancer cells respond to therapies, guiding therapeutic approach, of course. The patient's oncologist gets test results in 2 to 6 weeks. So this is what a CLIA model looks like. You own the lab, you run the lab, you run your own diagnostic, you're not licensing it to anyone. Clients will ship you samples, you run it through, you send them results. And here's another one. This is actually a UCSF startup called Enable Biosciences. Like many others, they've now are doing a lot of COVID work. They've been very successful. They've actually been adopted by the California Department of Public Health. They have their own CLIA lab. They've done it extremely cost effectively. They're doing very well, and they're a great model. Wei Chuan, question.
Oh yeah, I just looked it up, the S-Engine, and they closed a Series A for 5 million. So, that brings me to the questions. It seems like it's highly variable, like how much Series A is, goes from 5 to 50 to 750, the one you just mentioned. And can you sort of comment on the variability? And is it device company usually raises less, or
Wow, well, that's a great question. Things have changed dramatically in the last few years. I mean, it used to be Series A were maybe 5 to 20 million. 20 was like a big Series A, maybe more likely 5 to 10 million, or even less. And then, everything blew up in a good way in biotech, and there's just tons of money around. And what people were calling a Series A was really like an old Series B. And what they considered pre-seed was an old Series A, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But yes, you're absolutely right. There are crazy Series A's that have been hundreds of millions of dollars. I can't really explain it. You know, it's not great to raise huge amounts very early on, because the value, if your valuation is appropriate for the stage you're at, you're giving away so much of your company raise that money. But then some of the valuations have been crazy. Yeah, so great question. Just we don't have a great answer. So that couldn't possibly have answered your question, right? Just I'm observing.
Oh, good enough, good enough. Just some comments, or you know, it's good comments. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and you know, a diagnostics company isn't worth what a therapeutics company is. That's reality, nor is a medical device company. So, you know, for the highest valuations, you need therapeutics, but of course they've got the highest risk. You know, you're much more likely to have a viable business as a diagnostics company. Any other questions about this? Okay, I'm going to move into just the last thing to discuss, and then we're going to do a little exercise. So we talked about the business model canvas before, and I just to leave you with a little more about what this is. We're not using this in this course. This is the basis of the NIH and NSF course I-Core programs, which have been incredibly successful, have been promulgated throughout the country. And I was just talking to someone in Europe yesterday who wants to do it. And so it's already penetrated some of the European countries. So it's definitely worth knowing about. And maybe someday we'll do another class on this. But this is basically an organizing strategy. So it's this one-page document that works through all the fundamental elements of a business. And you can structure the idea you have in a coherent way. So it's a planning document. Let's just say it replaces what used to be a strategic plan. So the right side of the canvas, starting with its value propositions, which is in the middle, and going right, is about the customer. So it focuses on the external. We talked about the matching of value proposition with customer segments. That's the product market fit. That is essential. There's no point in doing the rest of this canvas unless you have product market fit. And then the left side focuses on the business, so internal. Who are your partners? What sort of are the key things you have to do? The resources you need to be able to do those, and your cost structure. Okay, so those are all internal things. And these all fit around this value proposition. So both internal and external give you the value proposition you're offering. So this business model shapes a company, and I think that's here, its growth potential, the ability to attract investors, the way you're leveraging your IP. Investors use the business model to assess your profit potential, and entrepreneurs use the business model to shape ideas into a sound structure. And when you choose your business model, you have to think about all these different things, how you're going to maximize profit, reduce development costs, leverage your IP, have a competitive advantage. We talked about how important that is, and then have that to be sustainable. So that's why this is so important. And I'm going to turn to Ahmed now to put us into breakout sessions for Ahmed. Let's do a 4-minute breakout, if you will, to discuss the business model. Having heard all this, the business model you think might be appropriate for what you've got in mind, for your idea, your company. What is going to be a good fit? What are some of your options? I just want you to have that conversation, and then we're going to rejoin the class for the last few minutes and discuss what you've learned or what you've thought about. So Ahmed, are you ready to roll? All right, let's go for this. We're sort of out of time. I was hoping to have a few minutes left to chat about, but I was listening into one of the rooms, and people were resisting talking about how they're going to raise money and trying to figure out what their business model needs to be. So raising money, you have to think this stuff through before you're ready to go raise money. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. Anyway, I hope the discussion was useful and gave you some ideas. This is a discussion to continue with your team now that you've heard the basics here. And yeah, business model is critical. So the next thing to do. All right, we need to stop. I'm just going to remind everybody that next week is the last class. And you should have 10 interviews done by then, more to share with everybody. We're going to be talking about investment, which I know you're all eager to hear about. Office hours are available. Please sign up. And I look forward to seeing all of you in a week or less. Take care, everyone.